Hi, my name is Shalom, and I'm going to do my best to show you how I made this artist trading card using the basic supplies you see here. We're going to start off with a standard playing card that is 2.5 by 3.5 inches, but you can use card stock or cereal boxes or whatever you have. We're going to use my favorite Tombow glue stick and glue down a collage paper that I made. And we're going to trim that. And you can either round the corners off with the scissors or use a corner round punch that I have here. Then with all those little pieces of paper that are difficult for some of us to pick up, I have a little lint roller that I like to use to clean that up. And we'll get ready for some ink smooshing. Starting with chip sapphire, I'm going to use my Distress Oxides, but you can use any dye ink or even just watercolor paints. They'll work the same way. You just need a non-porous surface like the silicone mat that I'm using or a glass mat, or you can go the opposite direction and use an acrylic block, smoosh it down onto the paper instead of the paper into the ink. You can also use plastic packaging. Then I'm going to be using some faded jean, although just the one blue probably would have been fine. I'm spritzing it with water in case you were wondering what I was spraying it with. Now we're doing vintage photo. I wanted to make sure we had a little brown still in there for a vintage look. And of course there's lots of drawing. Drawing between layers helps keep the colors from mixing, and it gives a more layered look. Now we've got a napkin. It's just a 2-ply napkin. I'm separating that white piece. I keep that, and I can use that later in other projects. Now I'm going to use a little paintbrush with water. It helps the napkin tear more accurately. Although you can just tear it straight or cut, but I have found the torn edges blend into your background better. I'm separating the little flower from the rest of the swirl pattern. I want to not have all the pattern on one side of the card. I want to have a little bit to the other side to help it balance a little bit more. And once I figure out where I want to place it, I will get out my matte gel medium, although you can use Mod Podge or other PVA glue. I just really like the matte gel medium. It's a good sealer, but it also dries nicely. There's no tackiness after it's dried like some glues will leave, like a plastic feeling. This just feels like paper afterwards. And I like to use my fingers, even though I can't stand them getting messy and sticky. I still will do it because you can feel the bubbles, you can feel the wrinkles, and you can just do a better job sometimes. So we're going to let that dry. I'm cleaning up the glue. Now we'll give it a little dry. Oh, and look how pretty that napkin looks over that background. I love using napkins. Now I'm trying to decide which butterfly I want to use. I printed these on a pre-colored paper, so I don't have to worry about it bleeding or smudging. So I'm just going to use my chip sapphire, spritz a little water, and paint it on. Nothing fancy, but it'll match my card now. Doing a couple layers. Drying in between helps. It also keeps the paper from disintegrating as fast because this is just simple copy paper. Now I'm going to cut out some little labels and tickets for some background interest, like a little cluster behind my butterfly. I'm going to ink these with walnut stain. I prefer that to vintage photo. Walnut stain's almost the same color, a little darker, but less yellow. Anyway, I just like it. So we'll get those all edged, inked up, and then we'll clean up and figure out the composition of where everything's going to go. Oh, I guess the card is dry now, so I'm going to trim off the little excess napkin that was hanging over the edges. I did want to add a little bit of scripty text to the background. I'm going to use my archival ink, which is permanent ink after it dries, so it won't smudge or smear if I do decide to add any other wet mediums on top. Now that is permanent ink, and I just got some on my silicone mat, but I do have a separate little water bottle with a little bit of lemon oil in it, and lemon oil is fantastic for getting off ink and paint, and it smells good. Now I'm choosing what size of cheesecloth I want to use. I'm separating that out, and I'm going to paint it with some acrylic paint in linen color. Just takes a little bit. I'm going to spray a little water on there to help it move around better, but using acrylic paint will make it stiff, which I like, but there are times when you don't want it stiff, and in that case I'd probably use the color tea dye in my Distress Oxides. I do color it with dye inks a lot, and then it stays all floppy and soft like cheesecloth. Well, my cheesecloth is, not everybody's is that flimsy, but I use acrylic paint when I want it to stiffen up a little bit and have more vibrant color. Now I decided that my butterfly, once I decided on which one I wanted, wasn't dark enough. So I'm going to go straight in with a paintbrush, a little bit of puddled water on my mat to help it flow better as I'm painting it, even though it's just straight from the ink pad. Worked out pretty well. It got darker. And once it dries, I will cut that out. And I hate fussy cutting, and I didn't want to bore you with showing you me cutting it because I'm pretty awkward. I am going to use just a little Sharpie marker and darken up that body. It gets a little bit faded with painting over it with that many layers of ink. Now I'm going to edge it with my black soot. I wanted black. And because it's not white paper originally, there's not too much to cover up, but I just did it anyway. Now comes figuring out where I want to put everything. This time I actually figured it out pretty quick, which is unusual for me. I can take forever sometimes. There are times when I have had to walk away and come back hours later. I get so frustrated. I'm sure I'm not the only one. But in this case, I'm just getting everything laid out. I'm using Nuvo glue. I've used lots of different glues. I kind of don't really care. I use Mod Podge a lot. I've used Barely Art. I've used the Art Glitter glue. I do have a few different glues when it comes to gluing paper to paper. Thin paper, I do like my Tombow glue stick. It's permanent. I haven't had a problem with it. Liquid glue is handy because you can move things around, especially if you're using cardstock. I like the white liquid glue. With lace and chunky things like the cheesecloth and then adding thread, the white glue doesn't do as well, so I will use Fabri-Tac. I use that sparingly. There's the Fabri-Tac. And I started out wanting to use this beige thread, but once I put it down, it's like it looked just like the cheesecloth, and I want more contrast. I like contrast. It helps things pop, especially since it's going right underneath my dark blue butterfly. So I changed to the white thread, and I think the butterfly stood out better. So I'll put some of the Fabri-Tac underneath. And yeah, it's thick, so that thread was already sticking to it through the cheesecloth, which is what I wanted. It'll hold that thread and cheesecloth in place. Now we just put down the butterfly. Spread out that thread a little bit. I do want it to show. Oh. And then we'll go back to my Nouveau glue to glue down the little labels. They don't say anything special. They're just there for kind of a visual interest and a little bit more contrast, something light against the dark. Then when I raised it up towards the camera, it was also close to my face, I realized I forgot to ink the edges. So now we're going to grab that walnut stain and be very careful not to get it on my white thread. This is one of the reasons why I usually do it before I add the focal point. But it turned out okay. After I applied the brown edging, I grabbed my black soot and added the thinner black line all around the edges. And I love adding that black. It makes it more dramatic and it's so finished. And I love how this turned out. I hope you do too.